got a wonderful idea. I'm gonna borrow Jeffrey's car and we'll go for a nice romantic drive along the lake, okay?
Sounds great.
I'll only be a minute, all right? I'm gonna miss you.
Oh, I'm gonna miss you.
Maybe you two could write each other.
Ever wonder if 80s TV execs were just throwing darts at a board of crazy ideas? Some sitcoms weren't just shows. They were gloriously unhinged experiments that defied all logic. We're unearthing the forgotten gems so bizarre you'll swear they were a myth. Wait till you hear about the post-apocalyptic one. 1. The Flying Nun.
Well, Sister Bertrill only weighs 90 pounds, and sometimes the wind lifts her.
Lifts her where?
Up.
But it's okay, I figured it all out.
We have to start with one of the absolute titans of bizarre sitcom premises, a show so strange it sounds like a joke you'd make up. The Flying Nun starred a very young and incredibly charming Sally Field as Sister Bertree, a novice nun at the Convent San Tanco in Puerto Rico. She was enthusiastic, kind, and, as the show repeatedly pointed out, weighed only 90 pounds. The wild part is, her slight build, combined with the large, heavily starched, wing-like cornet she wore as part of her habit, created a perfect aerodynamic lift. Whenever a strong wind blew, she would take flight. You are not misreading that. The entire premise of this 3-season sitcom was a nun who could fly, not through superpowers or divine intervention, but because of the specific physics of her hat. Each episode revolved around Sister Bertrill accidentally getting swept up into the air and into some kind of wacky adventure, much to the exasperation of the other nuns. The stern but loving Reverend Mother, played by Madeline Sherwood, was constantly trying to keep her unexpected flights under control, treating it less like a miracle and more like a chronic airborne case of the hiccups. The special effects used to achieve this were a masterclass in 70s ingenuity, usually involving Sally Field dangling from a clearly visible crane or wires against a poorly projected background of the Puerto Rican sky. From the outside, it seemed simple until you dig deeper. The show required a massive suspension of disbelief, even for the whimsical era it was made in. It was a mind-blowing concept that somehow charmed audiences for 82 episodes, a testament to Sally Field's immense talent and an era of television where no idea, no matter how physically improbable, was too silly to try. The Legacy is a show that feels like a shared fever dream for anyone who saw it. 2. On the Rocks.
I don't know how to tell you this, but there is among us a thief.
Pardon me, Fuentes, but at last count there were 614 thieves in here.
In the mid-70s, sitcoms were usually set in cozy living rooms, bustling workplaces, or friendly neighborhood bars, places the average American could recognize. So, in 1975, ABC decided to take a huge, daring gamble with a comedy set in a place that wasn't known for its laughs, a minimum security prison. On the Rocks was an American adaptation of a popular and critically acclaimed British sitcom called Porridge. The show followed the lives of a group of inmates at the fictional Alameda prison in upstate New York as they navigated life behind bars. The main characters were a collection of small-time crooks, lovable losers, and cynical old-timers, led by Hector Fuentes, a Puerto Rican inmate who had seen it all and served as the group's unofficial leader. The comedy came from their attempts to run small scams to make their lives more bearable, their constant battles of wits with the sadistic and lazy prison guards, and their ways of coping with the sheer, crushing boredom of prison life. At first, it looked harmless, but the very idea of a sitcom about prisoners was mind-blowing for 1975 American television. The show tried to find humor in a genuinely bleak environment, a concept that was decades ahead of its time and made network censors incredibly nervous. It walked a fine line between slapstick and dark, gallows humor. While it was praised by some critics for its daring premise and sharp writing, it ultimately made audiences uncomfortable. The idea of laughing at the plight of incarcerated men was a bridge too far for many, and the show was canceled after a single season, remaining a fascinating, forgotten experiment in pushing the boundaries of what a sitcom could be. Mundra Murder Smith.
Mr. Smith, I've been in gambling casinos. An elephant in a tannoir wouldn't get a second glance. Wait a minute.
If you thought a show about an alien puppet who eats cats was weird, get ready for this. The premise of Mr. Smith is so profoundly, deeply bizarre, it sounds like a challenge or a dare. A research scientist is working with an orangutan named Cha-Cha. Through his experiments involving a special beverage and a brain-stimulating machine, he discovers that Cha-Cha has a genius-level IQ of 256 and, more importantly, can talk. The orangutan, who now prefers to be called Mr. Smith, quickly becomes a media sensation. He is thoughtful, eloquent, and possesses a simple, logical wisdom that cuts through human complexity. You won't believe what came next. Mr. Smith becomes so famous for his intelligence and common-sense solutions to complex problems that he is brought to Washington, D.C. to work as a political advisor and consultant for a national think tank. That's right. This was a weekly sitcom about a talking orangutan in a three-piece suit solving America's political problems. The show featured Mr. Smith, realized through a combination of a live orangutan for movement and a puppet head for the talking scenes, offering sage advice to bumbling, corrupt politicians. In a typical episode, a stuffy senator would be struggling with a complex trade agreement. Mr. Smith, after thoughtfully peeling a banana, would point out a simple, elegant solution that cuts through all the red tape, humiliating the senator and charming a foreign diplomat in the process. The show was a high-concept gamble that failed to find an audience. It was too strange for a political satire and too talky for a family show. It was canceled after just 13 episodes, and its mind-blowing concept of an ape-shaping national policy has been almost completely forgotten. 4. Angie.
Are you late? I didn't even notice the time. That's true. She was too busy watching the doors.
On the surface, Angie had a classic, charming premise that felt like it was destined for success. It was a Cinderella story for the disco era. Angie Falco, a working-class coffee shop waitress in Philadelphia with a loud, loving Italian-American family, has a meet-cute with a handsome, wealthy pediatrician named Brad Benson. They fall in love, and in the very first episode, they get married. The show was produced by the legendary Gary Marshall and starred Donna Pescow, who was a huge star after her dramatic role in Saturday Night Fever. It seemed like a guaranteed, long-running hit. And then something totally unexpected happened. It was a massive hit. Angie premiered mid-season and was an instant ratings behemoth, one of the most watched shows of the year. The chemistry between the leads was fantastic, and audiences loved the culture clash comedy of Angie's boisterous family trying to mix with Brad's stuffy, ultra-rich world. The mind-blowing part of this story isn't the premise, but its spectacular and almost instantaneous collapse. Just when it all seemed figured out, everything changed in one moment. The show's entire premise, the will they or won't they make it? Conflict between two people from different worlds was essentially resolved the moment they said, "I do." The writers had nowhere to go. After a blockbuster first season, the ratings for the second season completely plummeted as the novelty wore off. Audiences lost interest almost overnight. The show was quickly canceled, making it a mind-blowing example of a show that was too successful, too quickly, for its own good, burning through its entire premise before the first season was even over. 5. Best of the West.
This is just an application for the Businessman's Association. You just sign here at the bottom. Could you move your hand?
The Western was one of television's most durable and serious genres. For decades, shows like Gunsmoke, Bonanza, and The Rifleman defined heroic, dramatic television with stoic heroes and high-stakes shootouts. So, in 1981, creating a weekly sitcom that was a direct, goofy parody of the Western was a truly mind-blowing concept. Best of the West was that show. It centered on Sam Best, a Civil War veteran and bumbling pacifist from Philadelphia who moves his family out west. Through a series of misunderstandings, he accidentally gets a reputation as a deadly gunslinger and is made the sheriff of a small, unruly town called Copper Creek. Sam was the exact opposite of the typical Western hero. He was clumsy, inept with a gun, and preferred to solve problems by talking things out, much to the frustration of the townspeople who were used to a more violent form of justice. He was flanked by his sassy Southern Belle wife, Elvira, and his smart-aleck son, Daniel. The show's main antagonist was the town's powerful and corrupt saloon owner, Parker Tillman, played with brilliant, sneering villainy by Leonard Fry. The show was a clever, gentle spoof of Western cliches with a vibe that felt like a precursor to the movie Blazing Saddles, but for a family audience. It was critically well-liked for its sharp writing and gentle humor, but never found a large audience. It was canceled after one season, but remains a forgotten gem, a mind-blowing attempt to bring Mel Brooks-style parody to primetime television. 6. The Ropers.
I thought you threw it out in the trash.
They refused to take it.
I hope it's not ruined. Sounds as good as ever.
Did somebody step on the dog?
The mind-blowing aspect of The Ropers isn't its premise, which was fairly standard sitcom fare. It's the sheer, baffling network decision-making that led to its creation, a move that damaged one of the biggest hits on television. Stanley and Helen Roper were the beloved, perpetually bickering, intimately frustrated landlords on Three's Company. They were the perfect supporting characters, the frustrated older generation reacting to the swinging singles chaos upstairs. Their dynamic was a crucial part of the show's comedic engine. Here's where it all takes a sharp turn. A network executive, in a moment of what can only be described as ratings-fueled madness, decided these two characters, whose entire purpose was to be a foil, could carry their own show. They were spun off into a new series where they sold their apartment building and moved to a fancy upscale neighborhood. The entire premise was their working-class sensibilities clashing with their snobby new neighbors. The problem was, it was supposed to be easy, until it wasn't. Separated from Jack, Janet, and Chrissy, the Ropers were just a miserable, bickering couple. Their one-note dynamic, which was hilarious in small doses, became sad and repetitive as the focus of a show. The series was a ratings disappointment and was canceled after 2 seasons. The truly mind-blowing part is that the network took 2 essential ingredients out of a hit show, weakening the original and creating a flop in the process. It was a spectacular miscalculation that fans of Three's Company still talk about. 7. The Ugliest Girl in Town.
Why should just Tim be married? Why not Timmy too? After all, she's a lovely girl with a charming personality.
Thanks for the flattery, buddy, but I'm really not in the mood for it now.
We're dipping back into the late 60s for this one because its premise is so uniquely mind-blowing and so far ahead of its time in its bizarre gender-bending concept that it feels like a lost 80s high-concept comedy. The show is about a Hollywood talent agent who sees a photo of a shaggy-haired hippie in a London magazine. He becomes convinced that this person is the perfect it girl to be the next big female fashion model, a fresh new face for the swinging 60s. The wild part is the hippie is a man named Timothy, and the agent saw the photo right after Timothy got caught in a rainstorm, which made his hair look long and feminine. Desperate for money so he can move to Hollywood to be with his actress girlfriend, Timothy agrees to the scheme. He puts on a wig, a mini dress, calls himself Timmy, and improbably becomes the hottest fashion model in the world. The entire series revolved around his frantic attempts to keep his true gender a secret from the public, the modeling agency, and even his own fiancée, who thinks he's just her boyfriend's strangely attractive sister. The show was a one-joke premise that was both confusing and deeply uncomfortable for the era. It was a bizarre, progressive for its time comedy that audiences in 1968 were absolutely not ready for. It was canceled after one season and has been almost completely erased from television history, a truly mind-blowing concept that was simply too strange for its time. Kiminen Turnoxen.
How do I look?
You look like Bozo the Clown.
Oh, sorry. I've never done this before.
I'll fix it later.
What are you doing?
The body swap comedy was a popular movie trope, giving us classics like Freaky Friday. It's a great concept for a 90-minute story where the shock and novelty can carry the plot. So, in 1979, NBC, in its infinite wisdom and desperation for a hit, decided to take that high concept and stretch it out into a weekly sitcom. In Turnabout, a wealthy, bickering married couple, Sam and Penny, magically switch bodies after an encounter with a strange statue in their living room. Sam, a gruff sports writer, suddenly finds himself in his wife's body, played by Sharon Gless, who would later star in Cagney and Lacey, dealing with her high-powered job as a cosmetics executive. Penny finds herself in her husband's body, trying to navigate the macho world of sports journalism. The pilot episode was funny enough, mining all the predictable but effective jokes about a man trying to put on makeup or a woman trying to use a urinal. But nobody saw this coming. The show had absolutely nowhere to go after that. The entire novelty of the premise wore off almost immediately. As a weekly series, it was a creative dead end. How many weeks can you watch the same two characters complain about being in each other's bodies before it becomes tedious? The writers ran out of ideas almost instantly, and the plots became increasingly desperate and nonsensical. The show was canceled after just 7 episodes, a fascinating and mind-blowing failure that proved some concepts have a very, very short shelf life and are best left on the big screen. 9. Jennifer Slept Here.
You got some nerve, lady. I got a plane to catch and I need my clothing.
Anything you say.
The 80s were obsessed with high-concept family comedies that blended the mundane with the supernatural, and this one is a prime example of the formula. The show was about the ghost of a glamorous bombshell movie star from the golden age of Hollywood, Jennifer Farrell, played by the effervescent Ann Gillian. After her tragic death, her benevolent ghost decides to stick around and haunt her old Beverly Hills mansion. A new family, the Elliots, moves in from New York, completely unaware that their new home comes with a spectral roommate. It all boils down to this one twist, which was the entire engine and a core conceptual flaw of the show. For reasons never explained by the laws of the paranormal, only the family's gawky, awkward teenage son, Joey, can see and hear Jennifer's ghost. This set up a predictable but bizarre weekly scenario. Joey would have a classic teenage problem, a bully at school, trouble talking to a girl, and Jennifer would use her ghostly powers, walking through walls, making objects float, to help him. Of course, this meant that to everyone else in his family and at school, Joey was just a weirdo talking to himself, reacting to invisible shenanigans, and seemingly causing objects to move on their own. The mind-blowing part is imagining the pitch meeting for a show whose premise guarantees that the main character looks clinically insane to every other character on screen for the entire series. It was a harmless, fluffy sitcom, but its central concept was so strange and limiting that it was canceled after one season. Gishunta Mr. Merlin.
They look like pink Alka-Seltzer.
And relief is just to swallow away.
The legend of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table is epic, timeless, and dramatic. It's a story of chivalry, betrayal, and magic. So, naturally, in 1981, CBS decided to take one of its central figures and turn him into a goofy sitcom character. In Mr. Merlin, the legendary wizard Merlin is still alive after several centuries and is now living a quiet, anonymous life in modern-day San Francisco, running an auto repair shop under the name Max Merlin. He's getting tired of immortality and needs to pass on his magical powers and responsibilities to a successor before he can finally retire. He finds his apprentice in Zach, a completely average, slightly clumsy teenager who stumbles into his shop. The show was essentially The Sorcerer's Apprentice meets a high school comedy. Each week, Zach would face a mundane teenage problem, a test he didn't study for, a car he wanted to buy, and try to solve it with a spell he wasn't ready to handle. The magic would inevitably backfire in a comical way, like making a car shrink to the size of a toy. And Merlin would have to step in, roll his eyes with the exasperation of a 1,500-year-old being who has seen it all, and clean up the mess. The mind-blowing concept of turning one of literature's most powerful wizards into a beleaguered mechanic and mentor to a goofy teen was pure 80s high-concept gold. While the show was charming, thanks to the wonderful Barnard Hughes as Merlin, its repetitive formula led to its cancellation after just one season. 11. The Powers of Matthew Starr. This show was a mind-blowing hybrid of a high school drama, a sci-fi adventure, and a fish-out-of-water comedy, a perfect storm of 80s television tropes. The premise: Matthew Starr is an alien prince from the distant planet Quadris. After his home world was conquered by a hostile alien race, he was sent to Earth as a young boy to be raised in secret by his guardian, Walt, until his incredible powers fully developed. Now he's a teenager named Matthew, trying to navigate the horrors of American high school while also training to one day return to Quadris and lead a rebellion to free his people. No pressure, though. He had a whole range of powers, including telekinesis, astral projection, and transmutation. His guardian on Earth, Walt, was tasked with teaching him how to use these abilities to fight evil. So one minute, Matthew would be dealing with a pop quiz in history class or trying to ask a girl to the prom, and the next, he'd be levitating a car or fighting off an alien assassin disguised as a substitute teacher. The show was a wild mix of genres that never quite figured out what it wanted to be. It had the action of a sci-fi show, but the tone of a lighthearted teen drama. The wild part is that the show's star, Peter Barton, was severely burned in a pyrotechnics accident during filming, and the production had to be delayed for months. It's a forgotten gem from an era when a show about an alien prince attending a pep rally seemed like a perfectly reasonable idea for primetime television. 12 Manimal.
Maybe we should call the police.
I thought we were the police.
While not strictly a sitcom, the premise of Manimal is so profoundly, deeply, and hilariously mind-blowing that it has to be on this list. It represents the absolute peak of 80s high-concept insanity, a show so ridiculous it has become a beloved legend. The show's opening narration explains it all with breathless sincerity. Dr. Jonathan Chase, wealthy, young, handsome, a man with the brightest of futures, a man with the darkest of pasts. From Africa's deepest jungles to civilization's highest peaks, he is the master of the secrets that divide man from animal. He is Manimal. The show was about a British criminology professor at New York University who had the mystical ability to transform into any animal he chose. He would use this power to help the police solve crimes. He would turn into a hawk to spy on criminals from above, or a black panther to chase them down dark alleys. The transformation sequences, created by legendary special effects artist Stan Winston, with their glowing eyes and rippling skin effects, were both cheesy and genuinely creepy. The truly mind-blowing part is that the show took itself completely seriously. It was played as a straight-faced crime drama. The concept was so utterly ridiculous that the show became a legendary flop, canceled after only 8 episodes. Its legacy is that of one of the most wonderfully bizarre TV shows ever made, a punchline that perfectly encapsulates the anything-goes attitude of 80s television. Tretonde Ottoman.
Of course, there are a lot of things I can't afford. For instance, there was that judge in Fort Worth, the late Honorable Homer Banks. Don't look so shocked. Whatever Billy Truspers wants.
Airing in the same year and on the same network as Manimal, Automan was another mind-blowing, high-concept action show with a comedic tone. It was a direct and blatant attempt to cash in on the groundbreaking visual success of the Disney movie Tron. The premise: Walter Nebuchar is a nerdy, socially awkward police department computer programmer who is constantly overlooked by his superiors. One night, he creates an advanced artificial intelligence program that generates a crime-fighting hologram named Ottoman, who can leave the computer world and exist in physical reality. Ottoman was, for all intents and purposes, a living video game character. He was pure energy, dressed in a glowing circuit-lined suit that looked like it came straight from the Tron grid. He was accompanied by Cursor, a floating, sparkling dot of light that could draw objects into existence. If they needed a car, Cursor would draw a glowing Lamborghini, the autocar, that could make impossible 90-degree turns. If they needed a helicopter, Cursor would draw one. The show was a visual spectacle of early CGI and glowing blue light effects. It was goofy, it was colorful, and its premise was pure 80s video game fantasy brought to life. Like its contemporary Manimal, it was too strange and expensive to last and was canceled after 13 episodes, but it remains a beloved cult classic for its sheer, unadulterated, creative weirdness. 14. It Takes Two.
Andy, what happened? A bomb go off in your shorts? No, we're getting ready to audition. I trust neatness doesn't count.
The premise of this sitcom was, on the surface, very normal and even progressive for its time. It was a family comedy about a dual-career couple in Chicago juggling their demanding jobs and their 2 teenage kids. The husband, Dr. Sam Stratford, was a successful surgeon. The wife, Molly, was a sharp-witted lawyer who had just been appointed as an assistant district attorney. The show explored the then-modern idea of a superwoman trying to have it all, balancing a high-powered career with family life. It was created by Susan Harris, the same writer behind the controversial hit Soap. The mind-blowing part of this show isn't the premise, it's the cast. This completely forgotten sitcom, which ran for only 1 season, starred an almost unbelievable lineup of past and future stars. The dad was played by Richard Crenna, Colonel Trotman from the Rambo movies. The mom was played by Oscar and Emmy winner Patty Duke. And who played their 2 teenage children? A young Helen Hunt, who would go on to win an Oscar for As Good as It Gets and star in the hit sitcom Mad About You, and a young Anthony Edwards, who would become a household name as Dr. Mark Green on the medical drama phenomenon ER. The fact that a show with that much sheer talent in its core cast could be produced, aired for 22 episodes, and then almost completely vanish from the collective memory is, in its own way, one of the most mind-blowing stories on this list. 15. The Last Resort.
Hi. What are you guys doing? Do you mind? We're doing a little necking here.
Oh, I don't mind at all. I'd like to watch.
This is another show where the premise is secondary to the mind-blowing cast of future comedy legends who were involved in this early career failure. The Last Resort was a chaotic sitcom about a group of college students working a summer job at a rundown, chaotic resort hotel in the Catskill Mountains, a setting famous for launching the careers of many comedians. The comedy was supposed to come from their interactions with the hotel's eccentric guests and their own zany attempts to avoid doing any actual work. It was essentially Caddyshack meets Fawlty Towers, but without the sharp writing of either. The show itself was a forgettable, frantic mess that was canceled after 15 episodes. But the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Let's look at the cast of completely unknown actors who were in this show. The students were played by a young Joe Pantoliano, Joey Pants from The Sopranos and The Matrix, Bronson Pinchot, who would later become a huge star as Balky on Perfect Strangers, and John Hancock, and who was one of the writers for this forgotten flop, trying to get his start in Hollywood. A young unknown comedian named Larry David, who would later go on to co-create Seinfeld, one of the most successful sitcoms of all time, and create and star in Curb Your Enthusiasm. The mind-blowing part is imagining a world where all of these future titans of comedy were working together on a terrible sitcom that nobody remembers. It's a fascinating, before they were stars, time capsule of a show that was anything but a last resort for their careers. 16. The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo.
Wherever you are, come on out with your hands high.
Perkins. They got me, Bertie.
The origin of this sitcom is, in itself, mind-blowingly strange. It was a spin-off of a show called BJ and the Bear, which was about a handsome trucker and his pet chimpanzee. One of the recurring antagonists on that show was a comically corrupt, bumbling, and greedy sheriff from the fictional Orley County, Georgia, named Elroy P. Lobo. For reasons that defy all logic, network executives at NBC decided that this smarmy, villainous side character deserved his own primetime sitcom. And so, The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo was born. The show followed Sheriff Lobo as he enforced the law in his small town. In reality, he spent all his time concocting get-rich-quick schemes, trying to look good for the governor, and generally avoiding any actual police work. He was assisted by his two idiotic deputies, Perkins and Bertie Hawkins, who usually ended up ruining his plans. The show was essentially a live-action cartoon, with Lobo as a southern-fried Wile E. Coyote, constantly seeing his elaborate schemes backfire. The deeper you look, the stranger it gets. This was a sitcom where the hero was a genuinely corrupt and lazy lawman, a concept played entirely for laughs. It was a cynical, silly show that somehow became a top 20 hit in its first season. But nobody saw this coming. In an attempt to broaden its appeal for the second season, the show was completely retooled. The setting was moved to Atlanta, the title was shortened to Lobo, and the character was changed from a corrupt buffoon to a more serious, effective detective. The changes completely destroyed what little charm the show had, the ratings plummeted, and it was quickly canceled. 17. That's My Mama.
He can't wait to get out of here. What's he going to fish for, Mama? Mermaids?
No, I think he's taking them with him.
In the mid-70s, sitcoms centered on black families and communities were finally hitting their stride, with Norman Lear's shows like Sanford and Son and Good Times becoming massive cultural phenomena. Lost in the shuffle was That's My Mama, an ABC sitcom that was just as funny and full of heart, but has been largely forgotten today. The show centered on Clifton Curtis, a young, eligible bachelor who inherits his family's barbershop, Oscar's Barbershop, in a residential Washington, D.C. neighborhood. Clifton dreams of a swinging single life, but he is constantly held in check by one overwhelming force of nature: his mother. Mama Eloise Curtis was the heart and soul of the show. She was loving, devout, and fiercely protective of her son, but she was also incredibly overbearing, meddlesome, and determined to see Clifton married off. The barbershop itself was the community's hub, a place where Clifton's friends and neighbors would gather to trade jokes, gossip, and offer unsolicited advice. What people miss is this key detail. The cast was filled with incredible talent. Clifton was played by Clifton Davis, who would later star in Eamon. His best friend was played by Ted Lang, just before he would set sail as Isaac the bartender on the Love Boat. The mind-blowing part is how a show with such a warm, funny, and classic sitcom setup, featuring a cast of future stars, could almost completely vanish from the pop culture conversation. It remains a wonderful, overlooked gem from the golden age of 70s sitcoms. 18. Small and Fry.
You're talking to a 6-inch man standing in a typewriter. How strange could he be?
Strange.
The 80s were rife with high-concept shows about detectives with a special gimmick, but this one might be the weirdest of them all. Small and Fry was a sitcom about a private investigation firm in Los Angeles. One of the detectives, Nick Small, had a superpower that he gained after a laboratory accident. The power? He could shrink down to 6 inches tall. But it all boils down to this one twist. He had absolutely no control over when it happened. He would shrink and return to normal size at completely random and usually very inconvenient moments. His partner, Chip Fry, was a by-the-book detective whose main job was to manage his partner's unpredictable condition. A typical scene would involve them chasing a criminal, only for Nick Small to suddenly shrink down, forcing Chip to scoop him up, put him in his pocket, and continue the chase while his tiny partner offered muffled advice from inside his jacket. The special effects involved comically oversized props, giant telephones, pencils the size of baseball bats, to create the illusion of a miniature detective. The mind-blowing part is that this pure comic book premise was played as a weekly sitcom, blending detective work with absurd, low-budget slapstick. The show was too strange to find an audience and was canceled after only a handful of episodes, leaving it as a bizarre, forgotten footnote in the history of weird TV superpowers.